This is Reworking Work, a video series from Quartz where we go deep with senior executives on the inner workings of their companies. All right, hi everybody. Welcome to Reworking Work. Today we have Josh Bersin with us. Josh, thanks for joining us.
You bet, Anna. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, could I ask you to just do a little introduction for those of you who are not as familiar as I am?
Sure. I'm an industry analyst and I cover all aspects of human resources, leadership, HR technology, talent management, recruiting, all of those things. I've been doing this about 25 years. And then before that, I spent almost 20 years as a sales, marketing, product management type person in the real world, the non-HR part of companies.
Yes, well, I was telling you before we started here that I've been following your work for quite a long time. As a former head of people, your frameworks, your research is so important. So thanks for all
how complicated this is.
Yeah, yeah, right. So maybe let's start there. We're talking pay equity today.
Yeah.
So first, let's clear up any confusion. What is pay equity? Let's define that.
I mean, the real, best definition is equal pay for equal work. The definition of what is work and what is equal is the judgment part, but that's really where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a point where individuals in a company who are contributing in different ways, as technical specialists or process people or industry specialists or managers or supervisors or leaders or whatever, feel that they are paid fairly relative to the people that they feel and others feel are contributing equivalent amounts of value to the company, value to the customers, value to the other people in the team. And sounds simple, but it's actually pretty complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. It's why we're still talking about it after all this time. But why do you think even right now pay equity is a bigger issue?
Well, it's been bubbling up slowly and it's just tipped over, I think, the last year. I mean, there's a bunch of factors. First is there are many more women working, more than half of the college grads are women. So there's the issue of women versus men. And women have been held back in the workforce for many years for a whole variety of reasons. So there's a pay disparity there. The workforce is much more heterogeneous. So African Americans, Asians, people in remote locations and different cultures are all now working together in companies virtually or physically. So there's pay issues there because some people are located in different cities or states or countries and they have different, standards of living. We also have this generational shift where people are living longer. So many companies have at least 4 generations, sometimes 5 generations of workers. So, the people my age, I'm in my 60s, who are sort of maybe nearing the end of their careers are slowing down. And then the younger people are coming in maybe at a higher pay. But not everybody my age wants to trim, sort of slow down. So we have a disparity there. So, and then of course, we have this inflation problem where everything you think you are going to do relative to pay 6 months ago is completely out of date now because the inflation has changed and the skills needed for different jobs are changing so fast that we have skills shortages all over the place. Look at AI, for example, just as one example, but in different industries, there are different skill shortages. And you oftentimes have to bid for people who have very specialized skills. So you have to pay them very high wages to get them to come. And that creates inconsistencies inside of the company. And so there's been basically 8 or 9 factors that have all collided. And then, of course, the EU passed a law that takes effect in 2024 that says that if you do more than $150 million in the EU, you have to prove to the EU through studies that you do not have pay disparities for gender, to say nothing of the other factors. And the United States is starting to pass pay transparency laws, which basically force you to tell job candidates how much the job range is for a role, which means the employees can see that and they can say, well, that's odd. They're hiring somebody into this job to make more money than I'd make, and I've been here for a year. And people talk to each other. And then I think the other thing that's happened is When I was young, entering the workforce in the 70s, nobody knew anything about how much anybody got paid. It was a big, deep, dark secret. The pay bands were a secret. The process was a secret. It was a sort of a, I don't know, just was a secret. Now everybody talks about it. So it's pretty hard to keep things quiet when you have problems. And so there's been lawsuits. The biggest that I know of is the $118 million lawsuit that Google had to pay based on gender, and others. So I think all of those things just kind of collided to bring us where we are, Anna.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors, but the one that I'm imagining is the company toes on the line, right? The lawsuits have really brought that, the pressure from the candidates for transparency around their pay. So let's talk in your recent research for the definitive guide to pay equity. That's the title. Yep. I was surprised, maybe not surprised, but maybe disappointed is the better word, that even though we had high commitment to resolve this, 95% of companies are not demonstrating high enough maturity to be able to improve the situation. Why is that? What are the main issues holding these companies back?
Well, we're not criticizing anybody. It's actually very hard to do.
Yes.
What most companies do is they ignore the problem for a while, until they realize they have a problem, and then they hire a consulting firm to come in and they do a one-time study. And the way these studies are done, if you think about it for a few minutes, it's actually kind of tricky, because you have to look at a whole bunch of factors and determine, you have a whole bunch of pay. So you have this network of employees with different pay levels. And then you have a whole bunch of factors. You have tenure, age, job level, job class, maybe, nationality, race, and other factors. You look at all the factors and you statistically determine what is correlated to the variations in pay. You find out that actually gender is correlated. Women make less than men. And that's not good. It shouldn't be correlated at all. I mean, that's really not a fair correlation. It might be correlated as a second order effect, but it shouldn't be a primary effect. So they hire these consulting firms, they come in, they do a study, they find out there's some problems. The CEO and the CFO are like, oops, let's not tell anybody about this. Let's do an adjustment, but we don't want to make a big stink about it because it's going to make us look really bad. So let's just make an adjustment and then quietly go off into the sunset and continue doing what we were doing. And then, as you know, 6 months or a year later, the same problem kind of crops up again. So these top 5%, the way when we went through and interviewed all these companies, they're doing this on a constant, regular basis. They're training managers on what pay equity means. They're looking at their skills, and they're trying to make sure that we're paying fairly for skills and we're not overpaying for certain skills. There's a lot of homework that has to go on here, and it has to go on a regular basis. So I see this as a new muscle, in a sense, not a consulting project that gets done by Towers or Mercer or somebody, and then they leave. You have to learn how to do it. And and there are now tools. There are a lot of tools, and there will be more, that will statistically tell you, if you're proposing to give somebody a raise or hire somebody, they'll say, red flag, if you do this, you're going to create a consistency or a disparity inside of your company.
So Josh, with so much of this effort that you've already talked about, training managers, paying people fairly for these skills, those are a few suggestions, but are there steps that a company should be looking to follow?
Yeah, the first thing is to do a pay equity analysis yourself or with a consultant to see where you are, to see the magnitude of the problem, the location of the problem, the sort of the nature of the disparities that you have, so you can see where you are. You should have bands and pay levels defined, so you have some structure for how people are paid. And the first project you do will show you how effective that is working. The second thing you need to do is actually look at the performance management process, which I know nobody likes to talk about. It's the most hated part of HR, but it is usually one of the things that's causing trouble. So, for example, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that women get slightly lower performance ratings than men. And when it comes to promotion to leadership, they are significantly less likely to be promoted to leadership than men, which means they're not going to go into that band and they're going to get paid less. So it has nothing to do with pay. It has to do with the way the performance management process works. So the person running compensation should be spending a lot of time with the person running talent management or performance management and looking at the process to making sure that everything is being done to simplify it, first of all, because it's usually too complicated, and that the managers, as they go through their annual review or however often they do it, are aware of the gender pay or other equity issues in their evaluations. Some companies have diversity councils or reviews, and they do talent reviews to make sure that the performance appraisals are not unfair, that they're not biased in some way. And they can be biased by all sorts of things. Age, it's not just gender. It could be age, could be nationality, could be location. There's all sorts of things that lead people to inadvertently give people, lower evaluations than they really should get. That leads to a conversation about what does performance mean in our company? How are we going to, how do we define performance? Believe it or not, a lot of companies don't talk about that enough. They usually say, here's a bunch of goals. And, if they hit their goals, well, we'll give them a good rating. Well, how important is collaboration? How important is innovation? How important is customer service? How important is hitting numbers? How important is saving money, et cetera? So that conversation has to happen. Then we need to talk about skills. So now the recruiting department, the talent acquisition group who's out there hiring, is going to need to sit down with you and say, well, that's all well and good that you have these wonderful pay bands, but we can't find people at that pay. Our benefits aren't high enough. Our brand isn't good enough. We're not an attractive place for these highly skilled people yet, so we're going to have to pay them extra to get them. How are we expected to do that? Should we give them a bonus? Should we give them a higher pay? So you're going to have all those issues. So in a sense, what the really sophisticated companies do over a multiple period of years, this isn't something that happens in a month, is they step into all of these topics and they start to come up with a pay philosophy that maintains fairness regardless of these different issues. By the way, another issue that you have to look at is remote pay. When somebody is living in New York and they're making X amount of money because of the cost of living in New York, and they move to Montana, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to drop their pay, or are we going to keep it equal? Most companies will say you get a different pay. There's a percentage of your pay that'll be changed based on location. So, if you're not getting into all of these issues, unfortunately, these disparities are going to crop up. And once this is all discussed and you have your head kind of wrapped around these different issues, then you have to basically document and communicate what your pay policies are. So not only managers, but employees know. Because when employees do find out that somebody else is making more or less than them, and they don't understand why that is, it leads to a lack of trust. They might blame the manager, they might blame the management, they might blame the company, they might not blame anybody, but just not feel good about it. And so we need to tell people, here's our philosophy, here's what we do about skills, here's what we do about location, here's what we do about promotions. For example, one of the techniques that Kathy, who ran the research, discovered was, every time somebody gets a high performance rating, good one, they get a raise, they get a higher raise. So that, of course, over time adds up. The people with a lower raise will never catch them because, every year's, the compounding effect of that. Well, that means that if somebody gets a high performance rating one year and a low performance rating the next year, they're probably still getting paid more than the person who did it the other way around. Is that fair? Well, some companies don't think it is. And so they've decided that you're going to get paid, your base pay will get increased based on your level of contribution in general to your job. And then your performance appraisal will be reflected by a bonus or a stock option, which is a one-time payment. So you don't have a grandfathering in of all these incremental increases. So these level 4 companies have looked at all this, for multiple years. And they've also said, do we want to, given our peer group, where do we want to fit? Do we want to be 10% above average? Do we want to be 20% above average? Do we want to be average? Do we want to be below average? Because one of the things you find when you look at the value of pay to people, it is important, of course, but there are other things that are important too. Career development is important. Flexibility is important. Having a great manager is important. Working in a project and a job you like is important. And so when we, looked at pay equity, we also, and this is another, by the way, research study that's come out this week, is we want compensation people to look at the whole deal, it's often called, that you're offering to employees. So the purpose of this research isn't to make people feel bad about what they're doing. It's really to explain to them this is kind of a whole new domain that needs to be considered. And then the other thing that I'll mention, Anna, that I think you probably picked up, is we looked at the relative impact of pay equity versus other aspects of the pay system on employees. And it turned out that pay equity is 13 times more important to an employee than the level of pay itself, which is just staggering. I mean, when I saw that, I couldn't believe it. But it reflects something that I saw in my career. Of course, I always wanted to make more money. I was never really a big money-oriented person, but if I found out that somebody was making 30, 40, 50% more than me, and that did happen to me in one of the companies I worked in, I was very, very upset and very disappointed. And I don't think I ever recovered from that in that particular company because it never felt like it was fair. And of course, then I really didn't want to work that hard. And then I started looking around. So this isn't just for regulatory reasons. This isn't just to be a good company and to contribute to society and all that. This is also a business issue of keeping people happy. So when you look at, Microsoft, Cisco, Unilever, Nestle, the SAP, the companies that really do this well, they pay people very well, but they don't overpay super performers without giving, reflecting on this issue. And they don't chase, sort of the superstars and pay them 3 times as much money to get them. They just accept the fact that maybe people like that will go somewhere else, and we'll get people that want to work in our organization, want to be part of our mission, want to be part of our culture, and they will receive a fair pay, and they will receive good pay for performance as well. Pay for performance is still important, but it has to be done with all of these other factors.
Yeah, well said, Josh. Thank you for that. That's a great overview of the process. I think there's a lot in the report itself, excuse me, that we could look to in terms of best practices, Patagonia, Microsoft, and others. But yeah. Is there one practice that you really would point to for companies to stop doing in the process that would help promote pay equity?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that upsets the apple cart is when the recruiter says to the compensation person, I need to pay these people more money because we won't get them otherwise. That is a slippery slope. No, it has to, you have to reflect what the market is, but, for everybody that demands an exceptionally high pay, there are people that would like to work for your company at a modest increase. So I think that is one of the reasons we're in this situation. We've had 14, 15 years of economic growth. Most companies had plenty of demand, plenty of profit. We had low interest rates. We had cash everywhere, right? Until the last year or so. And so we could just throw money around. And then for every individual in the company, it kind of gets back to, your internal bias. Do you believe that men are better managers than women, or vice versa? You got to throw that away. You really have to forget that. I mean, in many companies, the highly skilled people are the brand new people coming out of college who have learned new tools or technologies that people my age just never got around to doing. So there may be situations where young people are making more money than old people. And you just have to accept that. So, and then the issue of the organization and making the organization attractive, given that is the company a great place to work? And I hate to get back to that ridiculous thing that everybody talks about all the time, but do we have development? Do we have flexibility? Do we have a purpose? Do we have a mission? Do people enjoy their jobs here? Can I stretch myself? I mean, I had a call yesterday with one of the heads of HR at NVIDIA. I mean, NVIDIA is like one of the most hottest stocks in the stock market. It's an old company. It's been around since the early days of the PC era. Most people don't know that. They used to make basically chips and cards for games. Now they're wiping out everybody in AI. Well, it's a very fair, equitable, developmental, well-run, people-oriented company, believe it or not. It's not a bunch of engineer renegades developing, rocket science chips. They're doing that too, but they're doing it in a fair and equitable way. Look at Microsoft. Microsoft runs that way, and they're worth $1 trillion or more. You don't have to have that dog-eat-dog competitive culture to be a great company.
Agreed, Josh. And maybe we can wrap with this last part to really focus on the managers, right? You provide 9 guiding questions that companies can use to write their relationship with pay. To me, that's a lot about organizational awareness, right? How aware are we of how our work and the work of others impacts the organization? So I'm curious if we could point to the question around managers and leaders, right? How prepared managers and leaders, is there a best practice going on out there that you could point to that would help us do that better?
Yeah, I think managers need to go through some training to talk about the issues that I'm just brushing over here in this conversation. What are our pay policies? How do we define performance? What are the factors that should be included in a performance evaluation? When do we give bonuses versus when do we give stock options versus when do we give raises? What is the raise for? Is the raise for the basic job or the above the job work? What are the issues of equity that we have to be careful about? What do you need to know about skills and what we can and can't pay for skills? What do you need to know about location and cost of living variations? I just think, unfortunately, it's not exactly exciting stuff, but if you want to be a manager, and most people do, I think we need to teach them this stuff. And then I think I would also say to them, once you have a pay equity process in place, that your recommendations are going to be adjusted based on pay equity data. So we love your recommendations on how much money you'd like to pay everybody in your group, but you're not going to get to make that decision by yourself. We're going to look at it across the whole company. And I think, most managers would learn a lot from that. I think it would be good for them if they have never been exposed to all that information.
Yeah, there's so much that we don't understand about how pay works at our company. And at the very least, our managers need to keep pushing into that and keep with exposure, with experience, with training and education, get them closer to understanding, because it is people's livelihoods that we're dealing with here.
What happens is, as most of you know, I've had, I guess I've had probably, how many years have I been working? 40 years. I've had 40 performance appraisals at least. And I'll tell you, most of the time, I have a conversation with my boss, and then I get a raise, and I ask him or her, how come I got that raise? And they say, well, that's just how much we gave you. And I'm like, completely baffled. And I just decide, okay, I'm going to go back to work and not think about it. There should be an explanation, and it makes people feel better, and it gives the manager a little bit more credibility too. So, I do remember in the early days of my career at IBM, we spent a lot of time on this. We didn't have a particularly modern practices, but we had a very well-defined practice, and you had to learn about the pay system when you became a manager so you could, adopt and implement it correctly. And that's a giant company that's been around a long, long time. Also, a lot of young companies just haven't had time to deal with this yet, so they have to kind of learn.
Yeah, they're playing catch up. And this is our opportunity. This is why we call the show Reworking Work, is because we constantly need to be thinking, what could we be doing better or differently to get better results in the environment? And pay is such a critical part of that. So thank you, Josh, for all of your work around talent management and all of your work around pay equity. We really appreciate you being part of the show today.
Thank you very much for having me, Anna.
All right. Peace and progress, everybody.